There is a place in Africa where the air is thin, the cold cuts through to the bone before sunrise, and the ground beneath your feet rises so steeply that a single misstep can send a creature tumbling hundreds of meters into the valley below. This is not the Africa of the Great Plains. This is not the Africa of dust and endless flat horizon. This is a world of jagged escarpments, of moorland meadows that freeze solid at night and bake under an equatorial sun by midday, of mist that rolls in without warning and swallows entire mountainsides whole. And somewhere inside that mist, moving through terrain that lions were never supposed to call home, there is a pride. They are not big by the standards of savanna lions. Their paws find purchase on loose volcanic rock rather than open grassland. Their lungs work harder with every breath. Their prey does not behave the way prey is supposed to behave at lower elevations, and yet they hunt. They hunt with a precision and a coordination that no researcher had anticipated finding in this kind of environment. They hunt in ways that no pride living at sea level has ever been documented using, and if you want to understand how that happened, you need to follow them. Stay with us, because this story goes deep, and it will change the way you think about what lions are actually capable of. If you find yourself gripped by stories like this one, tap subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. To understand why this pride does what it does, you first have to understand the mountain. The peaks of East and Central Africa rise with a kind of geological arrogance that seems almost personal. The Aberdare Range in Kenya, the Bale Mountains in Ethiopia, the Ruwenzori straddling the border between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mount Kenya itself. These are not simply tall hills. They are entire ecological worlds stacked on top of one another, each band of altitude bringing with it a different climate, different vegetation, different prey, and different rules for survival. At the base of these mountains, where the foothills flatten into savanna and agricultural land, lions behave the way most people expect lions to behave. They form large prides. They ambush prey on open ground. They drink from rivers and permanent water holes, and they rest through the suffocating midday heat in the shade of acacia trees. But as you climb, the world changes. The trees thicken and close in. The open ground gives way to dense heath and then to Afro-alpine moorland, a landscape of giant lobelias that stand like sentinels on a hillside, of groundsels that grow to the size of small trees, of tussock grasses that can swallow a lioness to her shoulders. The air becomes sharper. At 3,000 meters above sea level, there is roughly 30% less oxygen available with every breath compared to the coast. At 4,000 meters, the difference is enormous. The physiology of a lion, an animal that evolved in the lowlands, was never designed for this. And yet evolution, or more accurately the pressure of circumstance, has pushed certain individuals up here. Some of them stayed. The pride in question, studied over years by researchers working in the highland zones of East Africa, is small by the measures of any classic savanna study. Where a Serengeti pride might number 15 or 20 animals and command a territory measured in hundreds of square kilometers of open plain, this highland group operates with far fewer individuals and works a territory that is measured not just in area but in vertical relief. The difference in elevation between the lowest and highest point of their range can exceed 1,000 meters. That means the pride does not simply move sideways across a landscape. It moves up and down through it, navigating gradient as a fundamental dimension of daily life. This shapes everything. It shapes where they rest. It shapes when they move. It shapes who leads the hunt and who flanks. It shapes the very sounds they make to communicate with one another. At sea level, a lion's roar is a declaration of territory, an acoustic warning to rival prides across kilometers of flat terrain, a signal that carries on still night air with extraordinary efficiency. In the mountains, still night air is rare. Wind moves unpredictably through valleys and over ridges, bending and scattering sound in ways that make a straightforward roar an unreliable instrument. Researchers monitoring this pride noted something striking. The vocal behavior of the highland lions differs from lowland prides in ways that cannot be explained by individual variation. The calls are shorter in some contexts. They are repeated at lower volume in conditions where wind would carry them downslope toward prey. There is a far greater use of close contact, low-amplitude vocalizations. The soft moan, the almost inaudible grunt, the contact call given when two pride members are within visual range, but need to confirm position, without broadcasting that confirmation across the entire landscape. This is not a genetic adaptation. These animals did not evolve special vocal cords in the course of a few generations. What happened is something more remarkable, and in some ways more profound. They learned. Or rather, the ones that hunted quietly enough to succeed passed their behavioral tendencies on through social learning, and the ones that did not failed to eat, failed to reproduce, failed to persist. The mountains selected for silence, and silence became the first of the tactics that does not exist at sea level. To appreciate the second tactic, you need to spend some time thinking about mountain ungulates. The prey animals available to a highland lion pride are fundamentally different from those available on the savanna, and not simply because they are different species. They are different in the way they use terrain. The mountain Nyala in the Bale Mountains of Ethiopia is one of the most striking antelopes on the continent. Massive, shaggy-coated, with a dark gray-brown body and the loose-limbed confidence of an animal that has spent millennia on steep ground. The male can weigh close to 300 kilograms. The female is considerably smaller, roughly half that weight, more agile, and habitually found on steeper ground than her male counterparts. Both sexes are extraordinarily good at moving on a gradient. They pick lines through terrain that a pursuing predator would find exhausting. They can gain elevation quickly, shift to a diagonal traverse when pursued directly, and use the top of ridges as natural alarm lines from which they can see approaching threats at distance. The Ethiopian wolf and the spotted hyena are the more common large predators in the Bale Highlands, and both have adapted their hunting methods to account for this terrain fluency in their prey. But the lions are doing something different, because a lion is not built for a sustained uphill chase the way a hyena is, and it cannot match the turning speed of a mountain Nyala on loose scree the way a wolf might pivot on a narrow trail. A lion on a steep slope is slower than it is on flat ground, overheats faster, burns oxygen at a rate it struggles to sustain, and telegraphs its approach with every displaced stone. So the Highland pride stop chasing. What they do instead is a form of geometry, pure, spatial, calculated geometry. They position themselves not where the prey is, but where the prey will be, based on a reading of the landscape that requires a level of terrain knowledge that takes years to accumulate and must be passed from experienced individuals to younger ones through direct observation. This is the second tactic. Topographic ambush, using the mountain's own structure as the mechanism of the hunt, and it begins hours before the kill. A hunt on the moorland starts at dusk, or sometimes earlier, in the thin light of a late afternoon when cloud has lowered the temperature and reduced visibility. The pride does not move together initially. The oldest female, the one who carries the greatest knowledge of this particular slope, this particular valley drainage, this particular pattern, in the way the mountain Nyala graze across the day, moves first. She goes upslope. This seems counterintuitive. Predators on flat ground approach prey with the wind in their faces, from a low or concealed position, moving to close the gap as efficiently as possible. This lioness goes up. She climbs past where the prey is currently grazing, and she moves to a position on the ridge above. From there, she does something that researchers found almost impossible to believe when they first documented it on camera trap footage analyzed later. She waits. She does not hunt from the ridge. She rests there, largely hidden by the tussock grasses and the low groundsel scrub, and she waits for the other members of the pride to move into position below the grazing animals. When the lower animals begin to move toward the prey, pushing them gently, not in a full rush, but in a slow, steady pressure that any experienced gazelle or antelope will recognize as a threat and respond to by moving uphill, away from the perceived danger, toward higher ground, toward the ridge, toward the waiting female above. This is the pincer on a vertical axis. It is not a horizontal encirclement, which is a well-documented tactic in savanna lions. It is a three-dimensional trap, using gravity, ungulate behavior under pressure, the mountain's own topography, and coordinated positioning that is orchestrated with an intelligence of space that leaves researchers with very little comfortable language to describe it, without sounding like they are overclaiming what animals can do. But the footage does not lie. The prey moves up, the ambush is above, the kill happens at the ridge, and the pride drags the carcass downslope to feed, because dragging a dead animal downhill costs a fraction of the energy that dragging it uphill would require. Even the post-kill logistics are adapted to the gradient. There is another element of the highland hunt that has no equivalent in lowland pride behavior, and it involves the cubs. On the savanna, young lions begin accompanying adults on hunts from a relatively early age, learning the craft of pursuit and ambush by watching, and sometimes by participating, in the chaotic final phase of a chase. The environment allows for this. An open plain gives a cub room to run, room to retreat, room to watch from a safe distance. It also gives a retreating prey animal room to escape even a poorly positioned young lion, meaning the consequences of a cub's inexperience are relatively low. On the mountain, the margins are razor thin. A cub that positions itself incorrectly does not simply fail to contribute to a hunt. It can ruin the entire operation. A mountain nyala that catches the movement or the scent of an inexperienced young lion in the wrong position will break for ground that no adult lion can follow across, and the hunt is finished. So the Highland Pride does something that is not documented in any lowland pride. The cubs do not join the hunt. They are stationed. They are placed by the adults at specific locations, often below the main hunting ground, near a natural feature like a rock outcrop or a dense stand of heath, and they remain there. They do not approach the prey. They do not attempt to chase. They watch. In some instances, the positioning of the cubs appears to serve a secondary function in the hunt, acting as a kind of boundary marker that discourages the prey from breaking downslope during the push phase. Whether this is deliberate, whether the adults are consciously using the cubs as tools in the geometry of the hunt, is something researchers debate carefully. What is not debated is that the cubs are consistently in the right place, that they are placed there before the hunt begins, and that hunts conducted with the cubs in these positions succeed at a higher rate than those where the cubs have moved or are absent. The mountain teaches even the youngest members of the pride where to stand before they learn how to attack. The cold is something the research teams documented in detail because it has its own effect on the lions in ways that would not apply to any savanna population. At altitude on the equator, the temperature swing between night and day can be dramatic. On the moorland plateau of the Bale Mountains, daytime temperatures in sunlight can approach 20 degrees Celsius, while in the hours before dawn, the ground temperature can drop to below zero. Frost forms on the giant lobelia leaves. Ice crusts the surface of puddles left by the afternoon rain, and the lions, lying on this frozen ground through the small hours of the morning, face a physiological challenge. A lion on the Serengeti does not deal with frost. Its coat, its resting posture, its choice of sleeping site are all calibrated to a warm weather existence. The Highland lions have developed postural and social thermoregulation strategies that again look different from anything documented in warm climate prides. They pile together in ways that exceed what would be expected from simple social bonding. The arrangement of bodies in a resting group maximizes heat retention, with smaller and younger animals consistently placed inside the group rather than at its periphery. The oldest and heaviest animals take the outer positions, not because they are indifferent to the cold, but because their greater body mass gives them more thermal inertia. They lose heat more slowly. They are the insulation for the cubs at the center. This is not random. It is consistent, and it is consistent in a way that only makes sense if the social dynamics of the group have been shaped by the thermal demands of the environment. A pride that did not sleep this way lost cubs to exposure, and so only the prides that slept this way survived to pass on their behavior. The question of territory on the mountain is also fundamentally different from the lowland model, and it connects directly to the vertical nature of the environment. A savanna pride defends a territory that is essentially a two-dimensional map. Boundaries run along rivers, tree lines, ridge edges, and the pride patrols those boundaries, marks them with urine and gland secretions, and deters rivals through roaring and occasionally through direct confrontation. The Highland Pride's territory is a volume, not a map. Because the prey moves seasonally up and down the mountain in response to rainfall, vegetation, and temperature, the lions must follow. And because other predators, including Ethiopian wolves, spotted hyenas, and leopards, also use different altitude bands in response to the same seasonal pressures, the Highland Pride is engaged in a constant, three-dimensional negotiation of space with multiple other species. What researchers have found is that the lions essentially claim different altitudinal zones at different times of year. In the dry season, when prey has moved to lower, more vegetated slopes where browse is available, the pride descends. In the wet season, when the moorland fills with grass and the mountain nyala and other ungulates move to the high plateau to graze, the pride follows. The territorial marking behavior changes to reflect this vertical dimension. Scent marks are deposited not simply along a perimeter, but at key topographic features, at the heads of valleys, at the junction of two drainage lines, at the top of a ridge where any animal moving between altitudinal zones would have to cross. These are choke points on the vertical landscape, and the pride marks them the way a lowland pride would mark a river crossing. It is a territorial system adapted to a world that has an extra dimension, and it has no equivalent in any savanna population. The relationship between this pride and the Ethiopian wolf deserves particular attention because it illustrates one of the most unexpected behavioral innovations that the mountain environment has produced. Ethiopian wolves are the rarest canids on Earth. They are exquisitely adapted to the Afro-Alpine zone, thin-legged, long-snouted, built for hunting the giant mole rats that live in burrow systems beneath the moorland turf. They are not competitors with lions in any direct sense. The lions are not hunting mole rats, and the wolves are not hunting mountain Nylala. And yet the two species have developed a relationship that is startling in its complexity. There are documented instances of the lions following Ethiopian wolf activity to identify where prey animals have been spooked and where they have settled after being disturbed. A wolf moving through the moorland causes the mole rats to retreat into their burrows, but it also causes the grazing mountain Nyala to lift their heads and shift position. A lion that can read the patterns of Nandala movement in response to wolf activity is essentially using the wolf as a scouting agent, gathering information about prey location without having to expose itself and risk triggering the alertness of the ungulates directly. Whether this is active use or passive observation that the lions have learned to interpret, the effect is the same. The wolves move through the landscape and the Nyala reveal themselves in responding to the wolves, and the lions note all of it. There is also, remarkably, a degree of tolerance between the lions and the wolves that exceeds what would be expected. On the savanna, hyenas and lions have a relationship of mutual antagonism that generates some of the most dramatic footage in wildlife filmmaking. The Highland lion pride and the Ethiopian wolves share the moorland with something closer to mutual indifference in most circumstances, broken occasionally by the lions displacing wolves from a carcass when it suits them, but without the sustained aggression that would characterize a hyena-lion interaction. Researchers speculate that this is partly because the wolves pose no real competitive threat to the lions in this environment, but it may also reflect a learned accommodation, an understanding on the part of the lions that disrupting the wolves' normal behavior patterns costs them information. A wolf that has been repeatedly harassed by lions changes its movement patterns. It becomes less predictable, and a less predictable wolf is a less useful source of information about prey. The mountain may have produced, in this pride, a form of enlightened self-interest about interspecies relationships that has no parallel in any lowland study. The hunting of buffalo in the highland zone represents perhaps the most extraordinary chapter of this pride's behavioral repertoire. Buffalo do occur in some highland areas, and where they do, they present a challenge to any predator. A Cape buffalo is one of the most dangerous prey animals on the continent. Its horns sweep out and then up in a curved boss that can disembowel a lion with a single strike. Its reaction speed is faster than its size suggests. Its tendency to charge rather than flee in response to a threatening situation makes it extraordinarily dangerous for a predator that relies on the prey animal running in a predictable direction. At sea level, large savanna lion prides take buffalo, but it typically requires a group of significant size, often 8 or more adults, operating in coordination, with the takedown focused on a single isolated animal or a calf separated from the herd. In the highlands, the pride is small. They rarely have 8 adults available, and the terrain, those steep slopes, that loose scree, those narrow valleys and sudden cliff faces, makes a buffalo more dangerous still. A buffalo that leads a pursuing lion across loose rock, or into a thicket of dense heath where the lion cannot maneuver, or to the edge of a slope that drops away sharply, has suddenly reversed the calculation of who is the hunter and who is the hunted. And so the Highland pride does not hunt buffalo the way any other lion group hunts buffalo. They have developed a method that uses the terrain as the primary weapon, with the lions functioning as the mechanism of delivery rather than the instrument of the kill itself. The Highland buffalo's instinct under pressure from predators, as with many mountain ungulates, is to move uphill. It is a deeply embedded response. Higher ground means visibility, means the ability to see threats approaching, means, in most circumstances, safety. But on this particular mountain, the pride has identified the places where the uphill instinct leads the buffalo into a dead end. A valley that closes to a cliff, a ridge that ends in a vertical drop, a bowl of terrain with steep sides on 3 faces and only one way in. The lions know these places. They know them with the intimate familiarity that comes from years, possibly generations, of moving through this landscape. And when they choose to hunt buffalo, they position themselves not to outrun the animal, not to overwhelm it with numbers, but to funnel it toward the dead end that the terrain has already prepared. The buffalo moves uphill. The lions do not chase. They accompany, they contain, they maintain a presence that keeps the animal moving in the chosen direction, and they wait. When the buffalo reaches the dead end and turns to face its pursuers, it is already exhausted from the climb, already in terrain where its normal defensive options, the circling, the backing into a herd, the open field charge, are unavailable to it. And it is there, at the cliff base or the valley head, that the strike happens. This is not ambush in the classic sense. It is something more deliberate. It is a process of environmental engineering, using the mountain's own structure to transform a supremely dangerous prey animal into a manageable target. It requires a knowledge of the specific landscape that can only have been built over a very long time. It requires the pride to communicate during the approach in ways that are sophisticated enough to maintain the containment without triggering a premature charge. And it requires a patience, a willingness to conduct a hunt that may take hours rather than minutes, that is unlike anything documented in any lowland lion population. The maternal behavior within the pride has also been shaped by the altitude in ways that are both subtle and significant. Cubs born in the highlands face challenges that savanna cubs do not. The cold is one of them, as already discussed. But there is also the problem of terrain. A savanna cub that wanders from the pride encounters grassland. It can be seen. It can be retrieved. Its distress calls carry across flat ground to the adults who respond and collect it. A highland cub that wanders encounters something very different. It encounters broken ground, steep drops, dense vegetation, and a landscape that swallows sound and line of sight in ways that make a lost cub genuinely difficult to locate. The mortality from terrain-related accidents in highland predator cubs is thought to be significantly higher than in lowland populations, and the pride's maternal behavior reflects this reality. The denning sites chosen by females in the highland pride are consistently in locations that combine shelter from the cold with natural barriers that limit cub mobility. A rock overhang at the head of a shallow bowl of terrain, a dense stand of heath at the base of a cliff, locations where the cub cannot simply wander out into open ground and disappear over a drop. The females also, in the early weeks of a cub's life, spend more time in close physical contact with the cubs than is typical for savanna lionesses. On the savanna, a mother will leave cubs alone for extended periods while she hunts, sometimes for the better part of a day. In the highlands, the periods of separation are shorter, and other female members of the pride take over cub-watching responsibilities during the hunt, in a more formalized way than is commonly documented elsewhere. It is communal cub care, and it is more intensive than the lowland version, shaped by the specific dangers of raising small, clumsy, uncoordinated young animals on a mountain that can kill them in a dozen ways before they are old enough to know what danger looks like. The role of individual experience and knowledge in the functioning of this pride cannot be overstated, and it points to something important about what lions are as cognitive and social animals. On the savanna, a pride that loses its oldest females loses experienced hunters, but the general landscape knowledge, the river crossings, the grazing areas, the ambush positions, is relatively stable. The terrain does not change. What the older animals know is important, but much of it can be reconstructed by the younger ones over time, through experience, through exploration. In the highlands, the terrain knowledge held by the oldest members of the pride is irreplaceable in a way that has no lowland equivalent. The specific knowledge of which valley closes to a cliff, which ridgeline is navigable in fog and which becomes dangerous, which slope the mountain yalla retreat to in the first rains, and which they avoid, where the footing becomes treacherous under ice. These are not things that can be easily or quickly reconstructed by young lions exploring on their own. The cost of exploration at altitude is very high. A wrong turn that a savanna lion would survive simply by stopping and reorienting becomes potentially catastrophic on a steep slope in poor visibility. And so the death of an older, experienced female in this highland pride is a more profound loss than the death of an equivalent individual in a lowland pride. It removes not just a hunter, but a library of spatial and environmental knowledge that took years to accumulate, and that the younger lions cannot replace through their own direct experience without paying a very high cost. Researchers studying the pride have noted that the loss of a matriarch correlates with a period of reduced hunting success that lasts significantly longer than the equivalent period after the loss of an experienced female in a savanna study population. The mountain's knowledge is in the animal, and when the animal is gone, the mountain becomes, temporarily, more dangerous for everyone who remains. There is a seasonal rhythm to life in the Highland Pride that is worth tracing carefully because it reveals how completely the mountain has restructured the lion's year. In the long rains, the moorland blooms. The grasses grow tall and thick, the giant lobelias put out their flowering spikes, and the mountain nyala move to the high plateau in large groups to graze the fresh grass. This is a time of relative abundance for the pride. Prey is concentrated, predictable in its movements, and the cool, wet air reduces the thermal stress of extended hunting activity. It is in the long rains that the most complex and coordinated hunts take place, because the prey is available in numbers, and the conditions favor the slow, patient, geometrically precise approach that is the pride's signature technique. It is also the time when cubs are most commonly born, which is not a coincidence. The mothers time their reproduction to the period of maximum prey availability, ensuring that they can sustain the nutritional demands of lactation without the extreme energetic stress that would accompany nursing cubs through the dry season. After the rains, the landscape changes rapidly. The grass dries and yellows. The mountain nyala move to lower elevations where browse is available in the forest edge. The pride follows, entering a different zone of its territory, one with denser vegetation, different prey configurations, and different hunting challenges. In the forest edge, the topographic ambush technique must be modified. Dense vegetation limits the value of long-distance positioning. The prey cannot be watched, and its movements predicted over distance in the way that is possible on open moorland. In this zone, the pride relies more heavily on close-range ambush from cover, a technique that is less alien to the general lion repertoire, though even here, the gradient shapes the approach and the positioning in ways that are specific to this environment. In the driest months, when even the forest edge becomes sparse and the prey is most scattered and difficult, the pride enters a period of reduced hunting success. It is the mountain equivalent of the lean season on the savanna, but complicated by the cold nights and the energetic cost of moving through steep terrain in search of food. The pride's social cohesion is tested most severely in these months, and it is here that the value of the hierarchical knowledge structure, the deference to experienced individuals, the tight communal sleeping arrangements, the intensive cub care is most clearly evident. Prides that hold together through the dry season enter the next long rains, with their knowledge intact, their cubs older and more resilient, their hunting coordination refined by another season of necessity. The leopard also lives on this mountain, and the relationship between the pride and the resident leopards adds another dimension to the highland behavioral picture. Leopards and lions at sea level maintain a relationship of mutual avoidance, with leopards consistently retreating from any direct encounter and caching their kills in trees, specifically to keep them out of reach of lions. In the highlands, the tree cover is different, and the caching behavior must adapt accordingly. But more interestingly, the pride has been observed to actively track leopard activity within its territory, not to hunt the leopards, but to locate their kills and displace them from the carcass. A leopard that has made a kill in the highland zone cannot always reach the kind of tall, spreading acacia that would give it secure vertical storage. The vegetation runs to heath and moorland scrub and the twisted, low-armed trees of the forest edge, none of which provides the elevation that a leopard would prefer. The lions have learned to follow the sounds and movements that accompany a leopard kill, the distress calls of prey in the final moments, the sudden absence of alarm calls from birds in a particular area, the movements of scavengers converging on a point. They arrive at the leopard's kill, and the leopard departs. The pride has essentially incorporated opportunistic kleptoparasitism of leopard kills into its resource acquisition strategy, and it is a strategy that requires the same quality of environmental attention and spatial awareness that characterizes every other aspect of how this pride uses the mountain. Nothing is wasted, no information is ignored. Every movement, every sound, every change in the behavior of other species is potentially a signal, and the pride has learned to read all of it. The cubs grow on the mountain in a way that is visually, behaviorally, and cognitively different from the growth of lowland cubs, and observing that process is one of the most striking things a researcher in this environment can witness. A savanna cub at 6 months old is beginning to explore, beginning to play hunt grasshoppers and beetles, and the fluttering end of a sibling's tail in the grass. A Highland cub at 6 months old is doing something that looks, at first, like play, but is structured in a way that play typically is not. The cub is navigating. It is moving up and down short sections of slope, finding the footholds, losing them, recovering, trying again. It is learning the physics of the terrain with its body, building the proprioceptive map of slope and surface and balance that will eventually allow it to chase a mountain nyala across loose scree without breaking its own legs in the process. The adults in the pride tolerate and, in certain contexts, appear to encourage this activity. Older cubs practice it in longer bouts, on steeper sections, in more challenging conditions. By the time a young lion in this pride is old enough to participate in a hunt, it has a relationship with the terrain that is physical and intimate, built through thousands of small interactions with the mountain's surface over the course of years. A lion dropped onto this mountain from a lowland population would be dangerous in a different way. It would be dangerous to itself. It would read the terrain incorrectly, commit to movements that the surface cannot support, approach prey from angles that the slope makes indefensible, and either fail repeatedly or injure itself. The Highland-born lion reads the mountain the way a sailor reads the sea. Not consciously, not with deliberation, but through a body knowledge that was built one step at a time on exactly this ground. The question that hangs over all of this, the question that researchers in Highland predator ecology return to again and again, is whether what we are seeing in this pride represents something that should make us fundamentally revise our understanding of lion intelligence and social complexity. For a long time, the prevailing view of lion behavior emphasized the instinctive and the relatively fixed. Lions coordinate hunts, yes. They form coalitions. They recognize individuals and maintain social hierarchies. But the degree of behavioral flexibility, the degree of what can fairly be called problem-solving in response to novel environmental pressure, has generally been characterized as limited, compared to the great apes, compared to elephants, compared to cetaceans. What the Highland pride suggests, if the research holds and continues to build, is that this characterization may be significantly underestimating what lions can do when the environment demands it. The mountain has not been a kind teacher. It has been a brutal one. It has killed the slow learners and the inflexible, and the ones whose behavior failed to account for the third dimension of terrain. And what has remained, what has persisted through the selection of those brutal lessons, is a pride of lions that hunts in 3 dimensions, that uses topography as a tool, that manages its information about the behavior of other species, that times its reproduction to the mountain's rhythm, that keeps its knowledge alive by keeping its experienced individuals at the center of the social structure, and that raises its cubs with an intensity and a deliberateness that reflects the mountain's unforgiving margin for error. This is not the lion of the open plain, the animal of the postcards and the safari documentaries, and the overused metaphors of power and majesty. This is something different. This is a lion that has been remade by altitude, remade by the geometry of steep ground and thin air, and prey that knows the mountain better than anything that evolved in the lowlands. And the pride remade itself to match. The mist comes in off the escarpment in the late afternoon, as it does almost every day, rolling through the groundsels and the giant lobelias, softening every edge, erasing the horizon, turning the moorland into something that feels ancient and enclosed. Somewhere in that mist, the oldest female is already moving. She is going upslope. Below her, spread across the tussock grasses, at intervals she has chosen from years of reading this particular piece of ground, the rest of the pride is getting to its feet, one by one, in the order that reflects everything the mountain has taught this group about how to survive. The cubs are placed at their positions. The younger adults fan out into the geometry that will make the hunt work. The prey does not see any of this happening. It does not know that the ridge above it is no longer empty. It knows only that there is a faint pressure from below, a barely perceptible increase in unease, and that the instinct which has kept mountain ungulates alive for millions of years is telling it to go up, to go toward higher ground, to go toward safety. The mountain taught the pride that this is exactly what the prey will do. And the mountain will be right, as it always is, and the ridge above will not be empty when the prey arrives there, and the thin air will fill for a moment with the sound of the hunt, and then everything will be still again, and the mist will close back in, and the pride will feed, and another day on this impossible mountain will end the way the pride has learned, through every generation that has lived and died on this steep and unforgiving ground, that it should end. And that is what it means to be a lion that lives above the world, not to rule it from the open plain, as the postcards would have you believe, but to read it, to learn it slope by slope and ridge by ridge and kill by kill, to become inseparable from the terrain and the weather and the movements of every other creature that shares this altitude, until the pride and the mountain are no longer two separate things but one system, shaped by the same pressures, responding to the same signals, enduring the same cold and the same thin air, and the same brutal economy of a place where every mistake is paid for immediately, and nothing that does not earn its existence is allowed to persist. The lions on this mountain earned their existence a long time ago, in ways that no sea-level pride ever had to, and they are still earning it, every night, in the mist, above the world.